Now, The Hill's the Rising. I made a video analyzing and elaborating Kim Iverson's tweet, which you also replied to, how she was calling them corporate news, reminding people of that. And in that video, I was telling people, look, you can watch them, but you don't have to unsubscribe for them. Just watch with a conscious mind that they're corporate news. That's what I did. That's what the host of Big Talk, Little Talk Israel did, and Dennis Potvin. Not sure if you know him. We were, our perception on The Hills of Rising changed. We noticed things that we didn't notice before. They were continuously like, all their videos is mainly like attacking corporate Democrats. Now it's mainly just like attacking Joe Biden, which is like serving the interests of the owner, James Finkelstein. So did you notice this stuff before Kim Iverson's tweet?
Oh yeah, look, man. The Hill itself is an older publication.
Yeah.
It's been around for quite a while as a news magazine. It's a conservative news magazine. It's got its roots in like the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society and things like, so when former MSNBC personality turned wannabe congresswoman turned newly minted independent media personality, Krystal started becoming the shiny new progressive that everybody was talking about on their horse race show. I went, the MSNBC chick has a show, and then I looked at it and I was like, oh, well, there's a couple of different things that are happening here. One is that what 2016 exposed beyond the corruption of the Democratic Party was that there was a huge lane for a media genre that tailored to progressives, that tailored to specifically Bernie Sanders fans, and that you could make a pretty good amount of money if your show was Bernie Sanders fan fiction. Mm-hmm. You could keep those, you could keep the Patreons, you could keep the super chats rolling in, high dollar super chats, just for confirmation bias. Who knew? And so obviously, like, more corporate entities are going to want to try to get in on that business model. The Young Turks specifically showed that you could both have hedge fund money and a YouTube base, and that would generate eyes on the channel, even though their content suffered tremendously, worse than it had been by far after they took the hedge fund money and became another outlet that was ostensibly cable news on the internet. But the Hill saw this. They saw this big wide lane. They saw someone who could read the teleprompter like Krystal Ball can, who can do it, with no small amount of intelligence and no small amount of like delivery and poise and class to her, and they exploited that. And now what you've got is a show that kept progressives in line for a couple of years, or at least a year, kept them from going third party, kept them from organizing outside of that system. Now they might be disaffected Democrats, but they're mostly registered Democrats. And they can point their finger at Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, and they can be double reinforced by Cigar and Jetty, who is giving you the Federalist Society talking points, who's giving you the Cato Institute talking points, but doing it in a way that makes it look like they're just having one jovial conversation about how bad the establishment Democrats are. And that's what you get in the Hill.
Yeah, it speaks a lot of how, like, Republicans are so much better at marketing than Democrats. Like, they're able to exploit the weakness in a lot of progressives seeking for more news that covers their favorite candidate. And they started out the Hill by bringing on indie news pundits. They brought on like Jimmy Dore, they brought on Tim Black and Sam Cedar. They brought on everybody. And then once they got their audience, they stopped inviting them on as frequently as they used to. So that was a tactic that they used to bring in progressives to watch their network. And, like, it's people believe them. Like, they think that they're being objective just because they have somebody like Sagar, who's a conservative, and somebody like Krystal, who's like a self-proclaimed progressive. And it's dangerous if you turn off the reality that they're still corporate news, and that the stuff that they talk about is going to be, they're not going to say anything that's going to make their owners mad.
No, I mean they're certainly not. What they're definitely not going to do is they're not going to tell you that there's a solution outside of the federal government. They're not going to tell you they might tell you that third parties exist, but they're never going to talk to you about the national security state. When they do talk to you about Julian Assange, it's tragic. But it's heartbreaking. It really is. And in fact, I think I don't know if I mentioned this on that thread or not, but when we were in DC, my co-host Andrew, we were holding a demonstration outside of the building where the Hill is, and Politico's in there, a couple other DC-based, not on cable news outlets that are in this building. And Krystal Ball came out, and Andrew went and chased her down. And as he's talking to her and letting her know what's going on, we're all inching closer so we can eavesdrop. And he was like, hey, we're Action for Assange. We're here in town during the first week of Julian's extradition hearing. We're holding events and demonstrations all over D.C. We've got this coming. This was on Tuesday. Tuesday was our media outlet day. So we still had the rest of that day and 3 more full days of events that we were doing. Would you please come to one? Is there any way that we could come onto your show and talk about it? Doesn't have to be me. Look, there's a pretty girl, she could do it. That kind of thing. And she was all smiles and yes and absolutely and please get back to me and we'll do this and I would like to come to one of your things and da 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 da, and fucking bounced. And that was the last that we heard from her. Never heard a peep on her show about, oh, I bumped into these protesters outside. Here's what they're talking about. If you've got one of the fastest growing, quote unquote, progressive shows around, and there are literally people holding a demonstration for the proliferation of free speech and to save the life of a journalist and publisher, and you, a journalist, go, yeah, I got shit to do. I'm going to question a lot.
Exactly. And so could you tell the viewers like what they reported wrong about Julian Assange?
So apparently they've done another piece or two since. The piece that I'm talking about aired in 2018. It was just a straight out hit piece on Julian Assange. It was basically just hitting the top 10 smears that mainstream outlets usually report. They talked about rape charges. Julian Assange was never charged with anything, let alone rape. He had 2 sexual assault investigations that were opened by the Swedish police that were not brought forth by any quote-unquote victim, but were in fact opened by the police, closed by the police, opened by the police, closed by the police, opened by the police, and ultimately closed for good by the police. But at no point were any charges filed, because turns out they were bullshit. And there's documentation about them being bullshit. Um, so they repeated that one. They repeated like, oh, that he's a bad house guest, and
Mm.
he skateboards in the embassy, like shit like that, dude. And they just went and the whole time while this guy who has not been able to go outside at that point in like 6.5 years, who has uh, we now know because of the report on it, but prolonged exposure to psychological torture. Krystal Ball is just cackling over it. She's getting a big old kick out of it.
Yeah.
Thinks it's fucking hilarious. And this is your shiny new progressive media icon. You know?
Yeah, at least
It's
come out
gross.
and apologize for that. I mean, and she lied to you guys when she saw you in DC to, I guess, get you guys off her ass. He's like, yeah, yeah, I'll
Yeah,
do it. I'll bring
guaranteed.
you on, and dips and never comes back. Why do you?
Mm,
So you already explained why you think she's doing this. It's probably because of her donors, and you think it could also be like fear, like she knows the truth, but she just doesn't want to talk about it since she is a part of corporate news, and she used to be part of this circle with bigger hacks. Um, so you think she's just afraid to tell the truth and step out of line with her donors or owners?
So here's the thing, like, and I'm really not sure what's happening with my lighting right now. But
It's all
anyway,
good.
um, uh, she's got a contract. She's got, there's obviously she's not going to go out of her way to piss off her boss or bosses or segment producers or advertisers. That's how you lose your job. To a degree, you're also right in that there's a groupthink in mainstream journalists and journalists like Krystal Ball who are mainstream journalists but on YouTube. And that is they're somehow untouchable or won't be affected if Julian Assange is extradited here because they play ball, you know. Um, but any of the people involved in putting together the Afghan papers that came out
Mm-hmm.
last winter, that showed that there was no game plan in Afghanistan, that nobody knew what the fuck they were doing, there was just rampant fraud and abuse all throughout. Washington Post put it out. Anybody involved in that could be going away for multiple Espionage Act violations. Um, so any kind of reporting that Krystal Ball would want to touch that is real reporting is out of the question for her going forward if Julian Assange gets extradited here.
Mm-hmm.
There is a culture of we can't talk about this because we know we'll lose our jobs if we do. While we were in DC, while we were in front of that building, we did have someone from the Hill come out and talk to us and said, hey, look, as long as I'm not being recorded, I can talk to you.
Yeah.
And he was supportive of what we were doing. And he went back inside, printed out a couple of articles that a colleague of his had done on Julian, handed them to us, was like, while you're bashing media later, at least please be sure to get this guy's name right and let people know that he did write a decent piece or two about it. Um, but there's an enormous amount of institutional pressure for them to play ball with the State Department, for them to play ball with intelligence agencies. Um, and that pressure and the financial security that comes along with not talking about it,
Yeah.
it is overwhelmingly what keeps people silent. And that's the same in independent media too.
Yeah, they're afraid that some people like in the independent media could be afraid that their channel will get taken down, or they'll even imagine like facing the same consequences that Assange and Manning faced. Um, I mean, a lot of that fear, whether conscious or subconscious, is there for some of these people. Um, so I can't believe she was laughing about Assange in the embassy. like that's like on a personal level, like what
You
she's.
can go watch it yourself. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure I put the video in that particular chat thread, but I can find it again. Like you can watch it for your.
Oh no,
It's
like I
gross.
believe it, but it's like, oh, gosh, like she'll really like do something like that. What like it's like Assange is suffering for wanting to do something to, you know, help the American people, not just the American people, but people of the world to know the truth about their governments. It
And it really does come down to that. If you want to have a complete picture of what your country is, you need to be able to have access to what your country does in your name.
yeah.
You know, with your tax dollars, with your military, your citizen funded military. It's supposed to be your citizen funded government and your citizen funded military. It turns out it is Honeywell and Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin and Boeing's funded military and government.
Mhm.
There's no separation now between defense contractors and the military, you know, except for they get to weed out the people who aren't sociopathic enough to become private military contractors after their enlistment's up.
Thanks for watching that segment of Hear Me Out. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell down below so you can get the latest on sports, pop culture, and progressive politics. Stay informed.